Okay, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Parker. I'm a member of the marketing team at the Perry Johnson Companies, and I'll be helping facilitate today's webinar. And today we welcome a special guest, Mel Blackmore. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone that they're going to be on mute for the duration of the session. However, we do want to take any questions that you might have, so you can submit those here. The slides today will also be available for download from the PJR website, and we're recording the session, so anyone who is unable to join us will be able to rewatch with the voiceover and the full Q&A free of charge on our YouTube channel. So Melanie has been involved with the creation, development, and implementation of British and international standards for over 17 years. She's a leader in her field, and she strives for innovation in the implementation and continual improvement of ISO management systems. So with that, I'll hand it over to Mel and we can get started.
Great, thank you very much, Parker, and it's a pleasure to be here. So I'm going to be providing an introduction to the energy management standard ISO 50001. And today I'm going to be talking you through, why have an energy management standard. We'll also be taking a look at some of the clauses within the standard and also the benefits. I'll be touching very briefly on ESOS, so there's some regulatory requirements if you're in Europe. And then finally, we'll close with some really interesting case studies with some organisations that you may have heard of, such as the Hilton Group and Bentley, to see how they've implemented ISO 50001 and what the benefits to them have been. Okay, now before we begin, I'll just provide you with a bit of background into what we do here at Blackmores. So we're leaders in ISO standards, and we've been implementing ISO standards for about 17 years now, and we've been doing that for many organisations over about 27 different countries, and we actually implement about 20 different ISO standards. So they're across quality, risk, and of course sustainability, which is one of the topics I'm going to be talking about today on ISO 50001. So in terms of some of our credentials, we're actually the founders of Isology. So Isology are the 7 steps to implement any ISO standard. And we've also got the Isology Hub, which is a digital online platform, which provides a wealth of resources from coffee break training through to templates, downloads, and e-learning. We've also got a podcast, the ISO Show, and I'm delighted to say that with all of our projects that we've implemented, we've had a 100% success rate across all the different standards that we've implemented. This is down to our fantastic team here at Blackmores, and that's actually resulted in us having a really high NPS, Net Promoter Score rating in our profession, which is basically a voting criteria on customer satisfaction on recommendations. And of course, we are extremely qualified and experienced in our field, so we've got the badges to go with that. So I mentioned about Isology. Isology is the 7-step approach to implementing any ISO standard. And just as a brief note for your diary, if you are interested in implementing ISO 50001, please do feel free to join us for a webinar where I'll be taking you through the 7 steps to implement ISO 50001. So that's the 11th of July. Make a note in your diary for that webinar. One of the things we're going to be doing for delegates that are attending the webinar today is providing free access to the Isology Hub for 6 months if you're looking to implement the ISO standard by the 21st of July. But even if you're not looking at implementing it, we have also got some free resources that we're going to share with you, which I'll explain about at the end of this presentation, just for attending this webinar. So they're free resources that we've got available in our Isology Hub that we're going to give you access to. So we work with clients across a broad range of sectors, from charities through to healthcare, tech, manufacturing, construction, you name it. We've worked in pretty much every industry, and these are some of the clients that we've worked with. So let's get on to the topic that I know that you're interested to hear about today, which is energy management. So why have an energy management standard? Well, unless you've been stuck in a closet for the last 10 years, you know, you would know that actually we are facing a global climate emergency. And that is quite simply an opportunity for us to take action right now. There isn't any waiting around. The science has been done. The data is there. It's proven. We are in a climate emergency, and all businesses do need to take some form of action. So why not have an energy management standard? So an energy management standard is particularly relevant for those businesses who want to measure their energy consumption and what the impact of that is on the environment, because this will help them to reduce their overall environmental footprint. And ultimately, Energy Management Standard ISO 50001 provides a globally recognized, standardized approach to best practice on how to manage energy management across any type of organization in any country across the globe. So what is ISO 50001? So ISO 50001 provides a best practice framework to help organizations to improve their energy performance and also energy efficiency. And therefore, this helps to reduce their overall energy consumption and carbon footprint. And we all know that many organizations have a specific target to meet within a certain time frame. Now, it does vary from country to country, but most organizations are looking to get to net carbon zero by 2030 or 2050. So this is a framework to help them to achieve that. So by building an energy management system, it's going to help you to understand what the key requirements are of managing your energy and to be able to monitor and measure your use of energy on an ongoing basis. And similarly to other ISO standards, continual improvement is at the very heart of ISO 50001. I will be exploring the standard in a little bit more detail shortly, but some of the key factors it's addressing are energy performance, energy efficiency, and energy consumption. So what are the main clauses of ISO 50001? Well, for those of you that are already familiar with ISO standards, you will know that the standards are based on a framework, a very common framework called Annex SL. And since 2018, this standard is no different. So we're in the current version of ISO 50001, which basically means that it's following a similar format to other ISO standards. So that basically means that from clauses 1 to 3, they're simply explanatory clauses, which you do not need to implement. You won't be assessed against those. It's from clause 4 through to 10 that you will be assessed and that you need to implement. So you'll need to make sure that you've got the controls in place to manage your context of the organisation, leadership commitment, planning, and in this case, it's all about having an energy review. So it's about understanding what your energy consumption is, the support mechanisms in order to be able to make that happen on an ongoing basis through operational controls. And then, of course, you need to be able to manage the performance of energy across your business. And as with all other ISO standards, it's based on the plan, do, check, act cycle, which is all about continual improvement. So this is the energy management system model. So this is ultimately the vanguard of your energy management system. You will have an energy policy statement, which is basically providing a statement of intent from the leadership team through to your key stakeholders. Energy planning. So this is where we're looking at understanding what your energy consumption is what is using energy within your business, how is it being used, and what is the impact of that on the environment. And then we've got those implementation operational controls that we need to be able to monitor and measure and analyse on an ongoing basis. And similarly with other standards under continual improvement, there are those requirements around identification of non-conformities. So that could be, what happens when there is a sudden increase in temperature outside of our building. How is that going to affect performance internally in terms of machinery and use of air conditioning and that sort of thing? So that can affect some variables, but also if something goes wrong, if something isn't being followed within your business as a process. And then, of course, we've got the methods within an ISO standard, such as carrying out internal audits to ensure that we have got good engagement, good levels of compliance. And then finally, management review. So ultimately, that's about reviewing the performance of your energy management system. Now, the good news is that if you've already got ISO 14001 in place, the environmental standard, which many organisations do have, this means that you're going to be halfway there to achieving ISO 50001. And that's because the standard is based on that common framework that I've just been through, clauses 1 to 10, but they're very similar for 14001. Now, you might be thinking, well, what's the point in doing 50001 if we've got 14001? Well, generally speaking, if your organisation has a significant overhead cost when it comes to energy, and it's your most significant environmental aspect and therefore impact, then you do really need to focus in on it. And ISO 50001 helps you to really focus through that energy management lens that you don't get in 14001. Okay. So yeah, having 14001 is a great asset, and it will make things much easier for you when you're implementing 50001. So you might be thinking, well, what if we've got other ISO standards like ISO 9001 for quality or 27001 for information security? Well, again, a lot of the common elements are there: internal audits, management review, document control, etc. So that does mean that you're about a third of the way there, which is good news too. So what are the key benefits of having an energy management system that's certified by a UCAS accredited certification body, such as Perry Johnson registrations? Well, first and foremost is that it applies to all organisations of all sizes, okay, across all sectors. And what we found, because we've been implementing this standard for many years, and in fact, we were implementing it before it was an international standard. It was actually a British standard, BSEN 16001, and we implemented this for an NHS trust, National Healthcare Service Trust, which included 2 hospitals and about 100 community buildings. And this is back in, I think it was 2012, 2013. And we actually identified about £1 million worth of savings, which is quite significant in energy reductions alone. So this isn't just talking about environmental management and waste and water, etc. This is purely energy management. Okay, so we know, and later on in this presentation, I'll be able to share with you some key organisations that you'll have heard of that have identified reductions, both financially and from an operational perspective. So it does help to achieve energy efficiency along this journey and also improve compliance, especially as we've seen an increase in legislation in relation to energy management. And I will be picking up on one particular regulatory requirement in Europe in a moment, because that's something that's It's pretty important right now. It only comes around every 4 years, but I'll be explaining more about that in a moment. And of course, I mentioned earlier on about net zero. So organisations need to understand what their energy consumption is so that they can then verify what their carbon footprint is and then look at routes to implement carbon reduction plans and to go carbon neutral to achieve net carbon zero. So this really does help that journey. And you may already have a number of energy programs and initiatives that are going on within an organisation right now, which is fantastic. Quite often they're disjointed and they're not necessarily aligned. Having an energy management system provides a holistic framework for managing all of these key initiatives and activities. So examples of some energy programs could be on energy production, renewable energy, and looking at alternative energies as well, if you're looking at bringing that into your organisation. We've also found over the years that it does help to facilitate certain financial incentives as well. So depending on where you're located in the world, there are certain tax benefits from managing your energy more efficiently, and also gaining finance, and also having data to be able to negotiate on certain agreements with key suppliers, such as your energy provider. So just a few other benefits. I mentioned about legislation. So with any ISO standard, you're looking at identifying the applicable statutory, regulatory and contractual requirements, and 50,001 is no different. At the moment in Europe, we are currently in the third phase of ESOS, that's the Energy Saving Opportunity Scheme, and 50,001 makes that effortless, ultimately, which I'll explain about in a moment. But one of the other key reasons is that organisations are going to get a USP. They are going to get a unique selling point if they've got ISO 50001 in their industry. In some industries, it's a given. You have to have it. But in others, you might be the first. So as an early adopter, this is a great PR opportunity for you to be able to share that news, via social media, on your website, in presentations and proposals, etc. So yeah, that can actually give you a competitive edge. And talking about a competitive edge, I think it goes hand in hand. If you're being at the forefront in your field, you could also be looking at different ways that you can use technology to help you to get there as well. Okay, and finally, a lot of organisations that don't have an energy management system haven't actually got objectives. They don't have what we call energy performance indicators when it comes to ISO 50001. So by having these indicators, by having these clear goals, you're clearly communicating to your stakeholders your level of commitment, and it gives you that opportunity to be able to monitor and measure your progress so that you can report on that. And this is where you can then basically set out some long-term commitments and strategies when it comes to sustainability. So rather than just paying lip service to having some type of sustainability strategy, you're actually putting some hard facts down there of what you're going to achieve, when you're going to achieve it, and how you're going to get there. And that's one of those key differentiators with having ISO 50001. And finally, it's not just you that would be making that statement. You would also have an independent third-party certification body verifying that. So that ultimately helps you to demonstrate even more credibility and confidence to your key stakeholders. Now, I can't really talk about 50001 this year in 2023 without mentioning ESOS, which did crop up earlier on. So This is really for our European listeners. So forgive me if you're listening further afield, but I do need to mention this because this is a regulatory requirement across Europe at the moment. So this is something that has been around since 2013, and ultimately ESOS is the Energy Savings Opportunity Scheme. So it's ultimately a scheme that makes large enterprises capture what their energy consumption is. So they have to do a mandatory energy assessment and energy savings identification report. Okay, so how do you know if you qualify for that if you're listening in Europe? Well, you need to have more than 250 employees and or an annual turnover in excess of £44 million. So yeah, that's it's really affecting those larger organisations, but only in the private sector. So public sector is exempt. And finally, you might be thinking, well, what does this have to do with ISO 50001? I did mention earlier that having 50001 will make ESOS effortless. And that's because there are two routes to achieving ESOS compliance. One is to conduct energy audits across all of your sites, which involves compiling energy data and submitting an evidence pack to your regulatory body. In the UK, that's the Environment Agency, but each country in Europe will have their own regulatory body that they submit that to online. But ultimately, if you have ISO 50001, you don't need to do that because ISO 50001 goes well above and beyond just doing a tick box energy audit. Now, some news that we just heard about in the last week, so this is hot off the press, is that the phase 3 deadline that was due in December 2023 has actually been extended to the 5th of June 2024. Now, that's really good news for those organisations that are looking to implement ISO 50001, because generally you need about 6 months to implement ISO 50001. We have done it much quicker. We have done it in 3 months. Some organisations may take a bit longer, but 6 months is a good indicator for the time frame to get you from 0 through to certified. So what about ISO 50001 in practice? Now, I am going to be doing another webinar on how to implement ISO 50001, which is on the 11th of July. And don't forget, we have got some free resources for you from the Isology Hub that we'll be giving to our delegates that are listening to this webinar today. But I thought it would be interesting to share with you a few real-life examples of how 50001 is working in practice with certain organisations. So let's take a look at Toyota. So looking at a couple of automotive organisations initially. So if you've implemented an ISO standard before, you know that you can extend or restrict the scope of your certification. So you could have it just in Los Angeles or just in the UK or just for certain services or products. In this particular case, Toyota started out with implementing an energy management system in South Africa. And this resulted in reducing electricity usage, which translated into cost savings of more than 4.8 million rand, which is just over £200,000 over a 2-year period. And by the way, we have implemented this for Toyota here in the UK as well. Yeah, this resulted, and bear in mind this is only one area of Toyota, but it is already identifying significant cost savings across 14 plants and reducing carbon emissions by almost 8,000 tonnes. Another organisation in the automotive industry is Bentley, that have adopted ISO 50001 and really embrace this, not just for their day-to-day operations, but how they actually manufacture their cars. So this has resulted in reducing energy by 2/3 for each car that Bentley produce. I'll just repeat that because that's quite a significant figure. They're reducing their energy usage by 2/3 for each and every car that's produced. How have they done that? Well, they've implemented sophisticated energy monitoring systems. They've targeted specific areas. They've created strategies for improvement on all areas, from the use of their boilers and compressed air systems through to, heating, lighting, insulation, every single aspect that you can imagine. So they have really fully embraced ISO 50001 and all of the benefits that can be derived from it. So what are the results of that? Well, in addition to that 2/3 of energy being reduced for each car, it's provided 14% overall for the entire plant and savings of 230 gigawatt hours of energy, which is enough to power 11,500 houses every single year. Pretty impressive. So let's look at Hitachi. So following the Japanese earthquake disaster in 2011, Hitachi decided to introduce the smart next generation factory plan. So as well as business continuity planning, this is also going to involve focusing on energy efficiency. And they recognise that ISO 50001 would be the great tool to do that. Now, the Japanese are huge fans of ISO standards. They've got probably one of the highest number of ISO 27001 certifications globally. And they have always been leaders when it comes to standards. So in this particular case, following implementation of 50001, the plant reduced 23% of the contracted electricity, 15% of its CO2 emissions, and cost savings of 5 million yen a month in electricity costs. Again, really significant numbers. And then IBM, they reduced their energy consumption by 9.2% with significant cost savings. And they also achieved their overall goals as well within a certain time frame, which almost doubled the corporate IBM goal of a 4% reduction in annual energy consumption of electricity and natural gas. And then finally, the last two case studies I'd like to just leave with you, because obviously we focused on manufacturing and automotive and tech companies, but Hilton, obviously one of the leading hospitality organisations in the world, they achieved portfolio-wide certification to 50001, and they have seen significant reductions. So they've reduced their energy intensity by 20% and its carbon intensity by 30% from that 2008 baseline. So whenever you're introducing an energy management system, you always start with a baseline that you're then managing your energy performance indicators on. So that's why that baseline is referenced there. So that's a few years old, but still very relevant today. And then finally, Schneider Electric. So following certification, they reduced by 10.5% with total savings of about £27,000 as well. So yeah, there's some really interesting real life examples on businesses that have embraced ISO 50001 and are able to demonstrate real tangible results. So not just paying lip service. So to help you get started, what we're doing is we're going to provide you with some free resources from the Isology Hub. So this is to give you a head start on your energy management journey. And there are 3 templates that we're going to provide you with, okay, free of charge. So that's going to be an energy data collection plan template and also an energy information gathering questionnaire. So that could be something that you send out to your key suppliers, because it may be your suppliers that are actually providing that data for you. And then also to give you some insight into what type of documents are required for 50001, we're also going to share with you our 50,001 document checklist. Okay, so you'll be sent details on how to get access to these after the webinar. In addition to that, what we're also going to be doing is providing those listeners who would like to implement ISO 50001 with free access to the Isology Hub for 6 months. Okay, so but that's if you sign up by the 21st of July. And the reason we've got that deadline there is because we know that it's going to get extremely busy over the next few months with all of the ESOS deadlines. So if we can get those, projects started and committed to by the 21st of July, that means it gives you ample time to meet your ESOS deadline requirements. Okay. So yeah, thanks very much for listening. I hope you found that helpful, and yeah, I hope that it's given you a better insight into understanding what an energy management system is, what ISO 50001 is, whether ESOS is applicable to you if you're in Europe, and some of the benefits and real life examples of some organisations across the globe that have embraced energy management at the core of their business. So thank you very much for listening. I believe we're handing over to Parker now for questions.
All right, thank you so much. We're gonna open it up for any questions, so I'll wait a few moments for any of those to come in. Doesn't look like we have any questions coming in, but like I said earlier, this webinar will be available to watch later on the PJR YouTube channel. So if you want to go back and review it at any time, you can do that. But again, everyone make sure to check out the resources that were just mentioned that are all available to you. And sign up for the upcoming webinar on the implementation of 50,001 if that interests you as well. Okay, still doesn't look like we have any questions, so I guess we're just going to end it there. But thank you everyone for your time today, and thank you, Mel.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.